What's going on, guys? Abrasus here. So today we'll have some simple deployment tips, very easy ones. So most of you should probably know those. Well, we can even probably call them the deployment for dummies. But nevertheless, I think this is useful to have them. We have 3 tips and then some mix and match, or however it's called. First things first. Let's say that we are talking about the deployment when neither of the players drop first, and you want to have the proper deployment where we deploy 1 unit each and so on, which is not very often the case in nowadays, but it's sometimes happening, and it's sometimes really useful to understand how to deploy in that situations, because, well, people are not that used to it, so maybe there is some forgotten knowledge around here. Okay, so the first point is very simple. You should deploy not your cheapest unit first, but the least important for the given matchup, or if they are not, if not least important, then the ones that position is pretty obvious. So, for example, let's say that we've picked the top deployment zone. Let me mark it, and let's say that we are playing the hold the ground scenario. If your army consists of the standard Beasthuts, for example, which is like the minor unit, the ambushes, Gortax, the Lord on the Chariot, and some Mongrel Riders, then it's kind of obvious that your minor unit will go in the center. So even though this is a very pricey unit and very important unit in a lot of senses, it is useful to deploy it as one of the first units because its position is kind of obvious. Like they will pretty much always be around the middle anyway. The same goes for units that are very closely connected to each other. So, for example, if you have Empire crossbows that are sitting on the hill already, then putting the cannon behind them still on the hill is probably a good choice, because you want your cannon near your crossbows because of the engineer if you have him. And we have some other connections like this. Like if you have the Imperial Guard somewhere, then one of the detachments can easily be put near them, and so on and so on. So the second tip is to bear in mind where your units will land after few turns. And this will be the part of our mix and match, to match which units like which terrain. But in general, just not only think about the position of your unit at the start of the game, but where will they develop. So, for example, a very stupid example is we could put some cavalry here near the forest, but if we put it near the forest, then it will need to, if we want to get to something on the left side, then the impassable will be very problematic for them, and also the ruins. So maybe this is not the best place to develop your cavalry. The same if we are having monsters and we are deploying on the top, then maybe placing them behind the hill on the first round is also not always the best choice, because after this initial round there is an open space in front of them. So maybe it is sometimes better to just place them near the forest and to develop them nearby the buildings. Especially if you have druidism, then the wounds that you get on the first round actually don't matter that much, because you will be able to heal them, and wounds that you will get in the later rounds are much more crucial. The third tip is to always always think from the perspective of the opponent, which side of his deployment is more beneficial to him. So, for example, if I wanted to force my opponent to deploy downwards in one of the corners, the left one or the right one, then I would much rather force him to deploy in the left one. So, for example, if I have the units like slow chariots, I would deploy them on more to the right. So if my opponent decides to deploy in the better corner for him, which is the right corner, then the chariots will have an easier distance. And if my opponent decides to deploy in the left corner, which is the worst corner for him, then there is this offset of the chariots having longer distance to go. This was actually the case pretty recently in a game between Marek, our Vampire Covenants player, and Artur, which is the High Bonus player from Belgium. And Marek basically deployed his chariots on the side which was less beneficial to Artur. So it was an extremely easy choice. Like, imagine on this map, you play the Vampire Covenants and you deploy the coaches on the left side near the forest. then it is super obvious for the opponent to just corner on the right hand side and just defend the right hand side. If you put the coaches on the hill, then the opponent either has to face the coaches very soon, or he has to deploy in a very bad corner for him, the corner that is much harder to defend and much harder to score any scenarios from. Okay, and now for the last part of the video, we have 4 types of terrain and 4 types of unit: cavalry, monsters, or in general single units, shooters, and chariots. And I would like to ask you to try to match them to each other, like which unit likes which kind of terrain the most from those 4. So I will give you a couple of seconds to figure that out. Okay, great. So maybe let's start with the easiest one, which is cavalry. So the cavalry usually likes the lake the most, the water the most. First of all, because it doesn't affect them, but it affects a lot of other units in your army usually. So infantry in fact. So if you put your cavalry in the lake, then it's not beneficial to them per se, usually, but it is, but it just covers for the fact that the rest of your army doesn't have to deal with that. Also, sometimes when you have a cavalry, they usually don't have that many ranks, and they have troubles with fighting units that are steadfast. So in this sense, the lake also helps, that if you put your cavalry, for example, like this in the lake, then it's very hard to charge them, because the big infantry units will just break because of the no steadfast. So. And cavalry doesn't care that much about steadfast anyways. Okay, let's go next. Let's go shooters. Okay, so shooters like open fields mostly. Fields are probably the least tragic for the shooters because they provide pretty much no cover. Oh, and maybe I forgot to mention this, but I'm not I don't always mean like the best terrain to stand in and so on, but the best terrain to face. Like we've seen at the start of the video, I was talking about developing your units through the game. So I'm thinking here about where which obstacles will the particular unit want to face at the start and where it will want to develop. So for shooters, it's like obviously open terrain. They also kind of like hills, because standing on hill makes it much easier for them to shoot, but many shooters also have bows, which is volley fire, which means that the covers from the units on the way don't matter that much anyway. So we are left with the 2. And let's say single models. Okay, single models, it's obviously hills, right? No. Single models is obviously impassable terrain. Because okay, single models can use the hills a bit, but they are not that beneficial, and they are often bait because hills are often much more deeper in the deployment zones, so they usually make the monster just slower. How does impassable terrain benefit the monsters? Oh, it's pretty easy. First of all, you can cover yourself from any shots, and second of all, like any kind of monster position like this will only be charged by very few opponents. Like positioning your monsters like this, we've already talked about it in some previous videos, that it's actually very easy to limit the number of models that can connect to the single model, and impassable terrains or buildings for that matter, which are also impassable terrains, can help immensely in that. So that's why impassable terrains are usually the best friends for the monsters. And you cannot really do the same with hill, because on the hill, even though you are covered, then it's not that hard for the opponent to just fit on the whole hill, right? And just get more models in. Okay, and for chariots, it is usually the hills, because chariots are often defensive pieces, and chariots also like to get the charges off for some reason. I don't know why. So rerolls to charge are very important for them, and like positioning, even if you start here on the hill and you fail the charge, you will probably still have your middle on the hill after the failed charge, so you have like 2 turns of charges with rerolls, which are very nice. So the chariots are definitely the best friends with hills, and also chariots are usually not that expensive. Like if we are talking about a single chariot, it's usually like 250 points. So if you get like 2 wounds on your chariot, 3 wounds on your chariot, and you're scared about it, you can easily hide it behind the hill and let it chill for the rest of the game, because it's not that crucial of a model. For the single models, it's usually not the case. Usually single models that are not chariots are a bit more expensive. And that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and see you in the next one. Cheers.